Hey there, a very warm welcome to everyone who has joined us for today's Tech Tuesdays webinar on C360 and IICS for Global Customer Solution. I'm Vrinda, who will be the host for today's session, and Jaimin Patel, Solution Architect from the Informatica Professional Services team, will be presenting for this session. Before we start this webinar, here are some housekeeping tips. The duration of the webinar is 1 hour, that includes a 50 minutes Q&A. You can post your queries in the Q&A box. Dial-in participants are muted for the entire session. The session is being recorded and will be available in the Informatica Support YouTube channel and the Success portal. You'll also be able to download the slide deck from the Success portal. Please feel free to put in your feedbacks and suggestions for the session in the post-webinar survey. The Tech Tuesdays webinars are hosted within the Success portal, which is a micro-learning platform that offers free and unlimited learning to all registered users. This feature-rich platform was launched to help you learn and use Informatica products better. We have launched a data governance learning path in the Success portal that will enable you to implement data-centric approach to compliance based on your role. Here are a few important links that you can go over later that will help you in your product adoption journey with Informatica. Over to you, Jamie. Thank you.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining the webinar. This is Jaimin Patel. I'm a resident architect with Informatica Professional Services. I've been working with Informatica for close to 10 years now. As part of my journey with Informatica, I have worked with multiple clients. Probably I'll use some of the examples today. As part of this webinar, we are going to focus on global MDM solution using our multi-domain product and leveraging IICS for the integration needs. So now let's look at the agenda. So here's a brief agenda on what we plan to cover for today's webinar. We'll first review challenges faced by a global company in managing a master data. We'll then go over consideration for implementing a global hub. Now there are various patterns to implement a global hub, and so we'll talk about different architecture options available. We'll then jump into the integration portion, and for the purpose of this webinar, we'll mainly focus on the IICS cloud application integration capabilities. We'll go with briefing and then review how it was done for one of our customers. We'll share some artifacts so that you can visualize the approach. At the end, we'll open up for question and answers. Now, my assumption is that you have some background of master data management, as we are not planning to cover all the fundamentals. If not, you may want to review our other webinars to gain a good understanding of MDM concepts and the fundamentals. Let's get started with the challenges that are faced by our global customers. While we certainly have many challenges that we can list, these are the top 4 driving factors that we generally hear from our clients. If you're familiar with MDM, this is probably not new to you. However, in case of global companies, these problems amplify due to the scale and diversity of their business. The very first thing that we hear from our global customers is that there is no trusted source for getting the core data that they need to leverage for making the most important data-driven decisions. The data resides into disparate systems. Every business unit wants to maintain their own system and to use according to their comfort. This naturally results into proliferation of data as well as the systems maintaining it. In fact, one of the customers we spoke was even struggled to get the full picture of how many ERP systems they have across the globe. Naturally, all this leads to the second issue of missing 360 view. When you have data in such disparate systems, it's difficult to establish relationships and get that overall view of relationship with the entity. The other issue that customers struggle is with the multiple entries of same entity, maybe with some variations. This makes the reporting and analytics a difficult task. One other challenge that we hear from Data Governance Committee is around enforcing the right set of policies, securities, and standards due to data getting authored and generated into multiple places. Let's review a real-world problem statement from one of our customers who happens to be in a manufacturing domain. We spoke to multiple departments as part of our discovery engagement, and here are a couple of problem statements that can help you understand how exactly the challenge that we just spoke results into a business problem. The concern from R&D was that a lot of time during the R&D cycle, they had to onboard a new raw material or even suppliers, as they did not have great visibility into factories outside of the region. When we spoke to the sourcing department, they had similar concerns. They did not have a great visibility into raw materials to vendor relationship that existed across the enterprise. So if one vendor increased the price, they had to do a lot of manual work to find out alternate and go through a complex RFP process. This is even more important now from risk perspective. Supply chains have been disrupted due to the pandemic, and having this level of visibility can certainly help in finding out options if one vendor struggles to fulfill the supply chain. So for this customer, having a central global solution made a lot of sense because that would give them a good visibility of raw materials, vendors, relationship, and eventually result into a significant cost optimization. Now let's look at the logical architecture that they had. So in this case, as you can see, there were multiple ERP systems per region. They had presence in North America, Latin America, EMEA, as well as in Asia. These ERP systems will interact with the regulatory system, some of the R&D system, sales system, and eventually all of this data was brought into the reporting solution. Now, as you can see, there were multiple processes that existed by each region. So it was very hard to get the ownership of the data. We already spoke of the data governance challenge and the not having a single version of truth. So their vision was to have a centralized MDM solution that can facilitate maintenance of raw materials as well as the supplier data centrally. In this case, MDM maintained the core data. It was the one place, single place for approvals, for authorization, and for anything that needs to happen with the core data. And then eventually it got distributed to all these ERP systems, regulatory systems, as well as for analytics and reporting. Now, before you really decide on a centralized solution, here are a few things that you want to evaluate. First thing is figure out what's the consumption. And in this case, consumption basically defined as where the business value will be derived and when and how that data will be accessed. Basically, if you start putting the data architecture, this should answer that question. Generally, a thumb up rule is that keep the master data as close as to source. So making the data centralized makes sense only when it is going to be shared by the enterprise. The third thing is our relationships. Now, this is where you get the best value because generally speaking, MDM is the only system where you will be able to see this cross-domain relationship and act on it. Now, assuming that you have a good use case to do a global MDM implementation, here are some of the considerations that you want to take into account while implementing the solution. The very first thing you want to get started with is defining a core data model that could meet at least 80 to 90% of the requirement from each and every geography. Generally speaking, a party model is a very good start. If you're using Customer 360 or Supplier 360, it comes out of the box, and that could be a good starting point. Second, once you know your core data model, you want to start talking about how the data can be sourced from all the systems. One general idea would be to make sure that you define a common agreement and for sharing the data from the sources to MDM. Provide some templates that way it's easier for sources to provide the data as well as it's easier for MDM system to consume the data. Then you want to talk about some of the security and physical access concerns, especially with the data regulations. Some of the countries have very stringent rules, so you have to figure out whether you can really bring the data in or not. Further, you want to find out if there are any internationalization requirements, and this is important piece. This is where you probably want to have a data quality expert as well, because depending on the data, the format could be different, the language could be different, and the other things that you have to consider if you're bringing the international data. Then let's figure out the synchronization and correlation requirements. Make sure that whatever data you are bringing in, what will be the good way to share that data back to those systems. If you're planning to bring the data from existing MDM implementation, ensure that whatever solution you come up with doesn't impact the existing system. That way, it will be a less of a risk to implement. The other one is that for the smaller business units, they may or may not have a robust ID system. So think of putting Hub as a service, create some reusable components, provide the templates, let them provide the data, and you can have a central team who could do the rest of the stuff. Next, you have to make sure that you can sustain a good real-time and batch performance. This is where you want to start talking to your networking team to ensure that you have proper network bandwidth, you're choosing right data centers to host all the servers. Then you want to start talking about standardizing interfaces. This is important because you'll be dealing with so many systems. You can probably not afford to customize for each and every system. So the best would be define your own contracts and let source systems comply with those contracts and do the conversion that's needed. At some point, you will have to start talking about a business-specific data model extension or requirement just to make sure that it's viable for them to implement. Next will be lookup tables. Again, this is important because there are so many systems, they might be using different standards. So you want to start establishing crosswalks, find out what will be the enterprise standard that you want to store into MDM. Next will be the language and the impact on the matching rules. Depending on the geographies involved, you want to figure out how many languages you will have to support, whether all data can be in English or you need to have some local language data as well. And of course, this will have impact on the code base that you're using on the database. Then you want to do a little bit of deep dive into how exactly technically all the system will interface with each other, what tools, technologies that you will have to use. And at the end, you also want to figure out if there are any external sources that you have to interact as part of this project. Let's talk about some important cross-country considerations. The first being matching data across countries. This is important when you have significant data from other countries. MDM uses SSA name 3 as a matching engine. This engine uses a population file that's built by Informatica using years of experience to do a country-specific matching. By default, MDM product comes with a one population file that you can use. This may or may not be sufficient in all the use cases, especially where you have a lot of data from other countries, and if you really need to fine-tune the matching for that particular country. So if that's the scenario, then you want to enable multiple population files. As I said, it comes with only one, and so this might be an additional license, and so you want to start talking to Informatica sales team as well. The other bigger topic will be around centralized data governance. As the current process would be different from region to region, this will be an area that will need some work. Most clients would establish a data governance council that will start talking globally with the participation from all the stakeholders and come up with an agreed approach that can be applied throughout the enterprise. Similarly, on the implementation side, you'll have to figure out who will be responsible for administration and maintenance of the platform. Because this is not owned by one particular unit, it probably will be a shared responsibility. IT leaders from various units need to work out budgeting model and aim to establish a central core team that can handle the platform. So we spoke about the technical challenges at length, and now let's talk about the governance considerations. The data governance team would be responsible for getting to an agreement on a common definition of all the entities and its core attributes. It is possible that the current definition will vary from business unit to business unit, but in order for us to do an enterprise implementation, it's important to get an agreement and clearly define what it would mean to be a customer or supplier and how to do their grouping, classification, etc. Next, the committee should find out process for sharing and synchronizing the data across all the systems, define data security rules, very important, and how data will be synchronized and at what speed. Further, it is important that the data stewardship is clearly defined. As this is central solution, participation will be required from all regions. Committee should clearly define who will be responsible for what task, and a strong data stewardship team will be decided. As data is going to come from multiple business units, it is important that business also starts thinking about which system can be trusted over other systems for survivorship. Data profiling can certainly be helpful in making a meaningful decision. The other important aspect is the workflow requirements. As every region would have their own process to approve new supplier or onboarding, it will be needed to come up with an agreement to do this centrally using these similar rules that will apply across the geography. The other important aspect is the workflow requirements, as every region would have their own processes to approve a new supplier or a new material. All these different rules need to be accounted when establishing a centralized approval workflow and determine how exactly approvals will be routed. All right, so far we have reviewed important considerations that one has to make in designing a global hub. Now let's talk about architectural options to host MDM to support distributed hub, and we'll cover both centralized as well as decentralized patterns. Here are the 4 possible options for handling such scenarios. And now this slide is a summary of all the approaches, and we'll review each in subsequent slide in a little bit of detail. As you can see here, approach 1 is having a single hub instance with a single repository. And this is what we are going to cover today in more detail as part of our implementation example. Within this approach, you have basically 2 options. You can have one single data model per repository, or you can have multiple data models per repository. This is applicable where you have more than one domain, or you cannot share the data inside one ORS. Approach 2 is similar, is about having single hub instance with multiple repositories. Again, you can have single data model per repository, or you can have multiple data models per repository. Approach 3 is having basically multiple hub instances with single repository per instance. Approach 4 is what we call as hub of hub. And here again, you get 3 options. First, you can use MDM more as a registry. Second, you can have a master hub as an entry point and holding subset of master data. And the third is typical hub and spoke architecture. Now let's go over each of these options in subsequent slides. So this slide covers a reference architecture for approach 1 and 2. As you can see here, basically you'll be having single hub instance with the choice of either having single ORS or multiple ORS. The use case we'll be talking today will be falling under option 1A, and that is what we'll review in detail later on. Now, as you can see here, it's going to be a common infrastructure with a common data integration layer, which can bring in source data into either single or multiple ORSs. If you have multiple ORSs, there will be physical separation of the data, or if you go with single data model within one ORS, it's going to be more of a logical separation of the data. Now, this slide shows architecture with multiple instances of MDM. We have recently worked with a couple of customers who's trying to do this. The rationale for going with this architecture was that they wanted to act as a multi-tenant. Basically, one company is building a solution capability, and they plan to sell it to other subsidiaries. So when they onboard the other subsidiaries, while the logic and everything remains same, legal required them to keep the data physically separated. Also, because they are claiming to be a multi-tenant, action of one ORS should not impact the other. And in that case, it perfectly makes sense to separate them out. Now let's briefly review MDM reference architecture for hub of hub approach. This is very handy when you have existing MDM implementation across multiple business units and you want to get that enterprise level consolidated view. The simplest of the approach would be establishing a registry style MDM, wherein you are simply sourcing IDs and minimal match attributes from each MDM system. Then you perform matching and correlate these all IDs and probably tag them to an enterprise ID. So for any consumers who wants access, they can basically use this registrar MDM, retrieve the keys, and then go to the respective MDMs to get the relevant master data. This approach was a huge success as one of our financial institute. The scenario in that case was that this bank merged with another big financial institute, and both of them had their own independent MDM. Now, they were not immediately ready to merge those two systems. They wanted to give a unified login experience for the customers from both the banks. So in this scenario, data was brought in from both the MDMs and register style MDM was established. And this enterprise MDM was then leveraged to enable unified sign-in experience. The next pattern in hub-of-hub approach is establishing an enterprise MDM with a superset of master data. It acts as a front line for all other business unit specific MDMs. The data model in this hub will generally consist of core attributes that are common across the enterprise, and it's generally a simplified data model. Generally, no regional extensions or locally specific changes are made to the data model because it's assumed that those will be handled into the specific MDM instances. Now, the beauty of this approach, as you can see, is that everything is centrally managed, all approvals, all the data quality. And so it gives you a very good control of the quality of data that gets into the rest of the enterprise. This approach allows you to become more proactive with the data issues rather than finding it out late in the game. Now, one associated change would be to lock down any changes or updates to the core data into individual business unit specific systems. You generally want only enterprise MDM to handle those changes. That way you can control it in one place. Now, because this involves a change in the business process, you probably want to give some sufficient time to roll out the full solution. So this is another flavor of the hub-of-hub approach. As you can see, the role of enterprise MDM here reverses. The segment MDM will remain as the entry point for business unit specific data. At the end, data from all these individual MDM systems will be fed to the enterprise MDM. Enterprise MDM will merge these records and provide a golden enterprise view of a customer or vendor or material. The data from enterprise MDM can synchronize back with the individual MDMs as well as to the downstream systems. The good part with this approach is that it's non-invasive and it doesn't require many business process changes. However, drawback would be losing a centralized control, needing duplication of effort in maintaining the data quality. So to summarize, here's a nice decision tree that can help you determine which pattern will work for your solution. As you can see, a few basic requirements will be made by each pattern. So as part of your solutioning, you would want to evaluate all the requirements and come up with an optimal approach that works for your business goals. If you look at this decision tree, we can go a few highlights. Say when you need a strong relationship among domains, single data model would be needed. But if you have a need to do a logical separation, you will have to choose multiple data models per ORS. If you have a lot more locally specific needs, you'll be better off with either multiple ORS or completely separate instances. If you have to honor stringent privacy rules or physical separation, having separate instances would meet those requirements. For more established consumers who are already using MDM for years, hub-of-hub approach would be useful as it will not risk any existing process. All right, so that was all about MDM that we wanted to cover as part of today's webinar. Now let's move on towards the integration side of this. In my experience, the challenge on the MDM side will be around decision-making and coming to an agreement. However, when you start implementing, you will see that the real challenge is in integration. So it is important that you're working with an integration product that can support a variety of systems and can provide you an easy way to integrate and onboard the data from all those systems. For the purpose of today's webinar, we'll talk about Informatica's native cloud offering. So far, it was known as IICS, Informatica Intelligent Cloud Services. However, starting this year, as we have started adding a lot more capabilities other than integration, it is now known as Intelligent Data Management Cloud. Within IDMC, we plan to talk more about cloud application integration This component is suitable for application-to-application integration in either real-time or near real-time. CI is really good at handling overall orchestration that's needed for an enterprise-level data flow. Let's review some fundamentals of IDMC platform. This platform has multiple data-related services. The solution that we'll refer today leverages the application integration and the data integration services. As you can see, we have Informatica Cloud Repository, which holds design-level metadata such as mappings. The active execution of logic and the data processing happens on a processing unit that is known as secure agent. Secure agent will be within your network, and so we don't need to bring actual data into Informatica repository. Now, the usage side, IDMC platform provides out-of-box connectivity to a variety of systems, be it native cloud applications or on-prem vendor-specific applications. If you need to know full coverage, we have connected PAM that can basically showcase all the applications that are supported on this platform. Let's review high-level security architecture of our cloud platform. An administrator or developer would have access to the browser-based client interface. Depending on your organization policy, users will be authenticated, for example, say using single sign-on. Now, all the design time artifacts will be stored in Informatica hosted multi-tenant repository. At the execution time, this logic gets pushed out to the secure agent, which will start sourcing data using connectors to different on-prem and cloud applications. So as you can see, data need not leave your firewall, providing that additional security. Secure agent will maintain communication with the Informatica repository using secure tenant. Now let's review the options to execute the logic that you have designed. We go by the principle of design one time and execute anywhere. As you can see here, we have total 4 options available for deploying the secure agent. First, Informatica hosted and managed. This is basically Informatica will be hosting the secure agent, and you can process your logic on this hosted agent. Second option is also similar with the Elastic serverless components, and this is where you have big data use cases. The third option is clients can host their own secure agent either into private or public cloud. And the fourth is basically where you host it on your on-prem environment. Now, depending on your use case, you will have more than one secure agent. Let's say most of your applications are on cloud, then it makes sense to have a secure agent hosted on cloud. If most of your applications are on the on-prem, then you probably want to have an on-prem instance. For the complex scenario where you have dealing with both of them, you can always have more than one secure agent, and you can decide at runtime which mapping needs to be executed on what secure agent. Let's talk about key features of cloud application integration. The main focus of CI application is to automate and orchestrate business process. It provides a single canvassing tool that developers can use to define enterprise-level orchestration. You can design in one place, and you have the ability to execute anywhere, be it on-prem or on cloud. Once you've defined a process, you can automatically expose it as a web service without doing any hand coding. Use cases such as enabling database with OData and exposing it as an API are possible with just few clicks. You can pretty much consume any other web service, be it REST or SOAP, using service connectors. One of the common use cases is leveraging CI for event-driven architecture. CI can listen into event-based systems such as queues, topics, or even files, and subsequently trigger a business process that's needed after that. So you generally build a CI process to do event processing, service orchestration, or say process management. Here's a high-level view of how you'd start on a typical CI process. You'll first start with a designer to develop a process. You can define and call sub-processes within a process to break down the logic, and then you can stitch it together. CI provides a user-friendly interface to orchestrate various steps involved in building a process flow. It can leverage services and data providers such as APIs, queues, topics, database, as well as it can also invoke data integration jobs. You can also use powerful features like decision-making, parallel processing, error handling, all this with a simple drag and drop and point and click web interface. In the backend, designer follows BPMN notation. At the end, you can deploy this process and it will be available as a REST or SOAP API. You can deploy a process, connection, or service connector to a secure agent or a cloud server. Typically, you deploy asset that contains only cloud-based applications to a cloud server. But if an asset needs to access on-prem database or something, you need to deploy it on a secure agent, which will run the process server. The other service that you'll see on IICS landing page is Application Integration Console, which basically provides monitoring and management capabilities. You can view in-work processes, guides, etc. there. You can also view a detailed BPL view of the process and perform some debugging. It will also show you how the processor is performing. So here's an example of a hybrid orchestration. In this picture, as you can see, you have a bunch of cloud applications, as well as the on-prem application that needs to be integrated and orchestrated within one flow. So you can build that flow within CAI. What you can do is that for the execution, you can always leverage Cloud Process Server. That's basically Informatica hosted process server. And for the on-prem needs, you can install the secure agent, which will eventually run the process server and execute the on-prem processes on this particular secure agent. Again, design time metadata will be stored into Informatica repository. So both of this agent will be registered with the org ID that's available to you. One important thing is, again, you get all the wide range of connectivity that we provide on the Informatica cloud, be it Salesforce, Workday, or any other cloud-based application. For more custom on-prem integration, we support a variety of protocols. If you're using web services, then we support SOAP REST. If you need to talk to any database, we will have JDBC. For any event-based systems, we can always use CMS, or for cloud-based event such as SNS or SQS, we support all those connectors. Again, you can always do a file-based integration. We also have capability to call Java or shell process. So in short, this should allow you to integrate with any scenario and build that orchestration that you will need to complete a business process. Finally, you want to expose that process of web service and register that with API Gateway. API Gateway is Informatica's latest capability with which you get all the API management features, such as securing it, versioning, even caching. So all those good features will be enabled by default on your exposed APIs. All right, hopefully that gave you enough context around CI. And now let's review an implementation that IPS did for one of the global manufacturer to enable centralized supplier maintenance. This company has a presence in North America, Europe, Latin America, and some other parts of the world. In the current architecture, this customer had multiple ERP systems, all with different flavors. The end goal was to consolidate all this data and have a single point of entry to onboard suppliers. So this project was taken up to modernize the supplier onboarding and consolidation. Company had already bought a new e-procurement system to consolidate the data entry points and supplier administration. They also wanted to leverage Informatica MDM to ensure that they can create a single view of all suppliers, relationships, and make sure that there are no duplicate data. So the general thought process was that every supplier will be onboarded through the centralized new procurement system. Let MDM handle data quality, duplicity, and do the consolidation before sharing the data with individual ERP systems. Customer did not want to manage MDM instance on their own, and so they leveraged the Informatica hosted MDM solution. Just in case if you have not heard of this before, Informatica has multi-tenant hosted MDM offering, where Informatica takes care of maintaining the platform and customer can just focus on using the platform. We'll talk more on this in next slide. Here is a high-level solution architecture that was implemented to build a centralized global supplier MDM. As you can see, we were using Informatica hosted MDM. It hosts various MDM solutions such as Customer 360, Supplier 360, and Product 360. There's a hosted data quality engine that is integrated with MDM and can be used to perform data quality as well as load data into MDM via batch process. It also has a hosted IICS secure agent that enabled us to interact with all the systems on the Informatica hosted MDM. Customer also had few other on-prem Informatica products such as Exxon, EDC, and data quality. The on-prem data quality was used to evaluate quality and profiling of the on-prem resources. This instance was managed by customer. The other product was Exxon. Exxon was used to document the data governance processes and policies. The third product was EDC. This is what we use to get the lineage of all the systems, and it provides us a good visibility for our ETL mapping document. EDC served really well to establish a lineage for overall solution. Now, customer is hosting multiple secure agent per region. For simplicity, I have only shown two, but there were more. The scope was to consolidate data from total 4 SAP systems, 3 Oracle R12, and then there was some custom system built on top of SQL servers. Customer was also building a data lake solution. So our requirement was to feed the data once a day to an Azure-based data lake storage. So let's have a look at the solution in detail. This customer had recently acquired a new supplier onboarding system, and that is what we were supposed to use as an entry point for all the supplier data. Goal was to master the core data into Informatica MDM and then distribute it to the regional ERP systems. There was a need to do an external enrichment, and for that, a third-party service was also needed to be integrated. The overall process was needed to be monitored closely, and so any technical errors were required to be reported to an incident management system automatically. Customer was using Elemba as an ITSM system for this purpose. In terms of ERP systems, we were dealing with SAP, Oracle, and QAD. Most of the integration requirement with SAP was using APIs, and so we used BAPI connector. Oracle R12 had both batch and real-time needs. QAD was mostly using APIs, and the data lake was built on the Azure, which was supposed to be a batch feed. On top, the Informatica hosted MDM was on AWS. Now, as a first step, we did one-time data load from all these ERPs using CDI as a primary mechanism. For the daily deltas, customer wanted to make sure that all these changes flows into the individual ERP system as fast as possible. And so we chose a real-time architecture based on CI. So as you can see here, most of the integration was done using IICS CI, and for some of the couple of batch interfaces were done using CDI. Now let's go over overall process implemented to create or update suppliers on a daily basis. Now let's go over the process implemented to create or update suppliers on a daily basis. In terms of solutioning approach, an overall CI process was developed, which would then call multiple sub-processes and orchestrate them. This main process was deployed on a customer-hosted agent, which was an entry point for all the coordination. We had multiple secure agents deployed, and processing was pushed to a secure agent that was near to the source and target. The interaction with hosted MDM was done using Informatica hosted secure agent. Now let's review this step-by-step flow. As you can see here, this is the supplier onboarding system. User or a supplier through a self-servicing portal will enter the supplier-specific data, and that would initiate a workflow within the system. Now this procurement portal will send out the data into an XML format to the primary CI process that was hosted by customer. Secure agent will take care of parsing that XML and then sending out a call to Informatica hosted data quality to perform all the data quality operations. We did some general cleansing, formatting, text ID validation, and address cleansing, and that cleansed data was returned back to the IICS. Then this overall process made another call to MDM to make sure that the supplier that we're trying to onboard does not exist. If it was existing, then a logical error was sent back to the supplier portal, asking for them to use the existing supplier. If it was a new supplier, then additional enrichment was done to make sure that the data that was needed to fill out these additional extended attributes are covered. So here's a snippet from the primary orchestration process. That was an entry point for the full orchestration. As you can see, this was designed as more of an asynchronous process. So as a first step, once the request was received, a response was sent back to the procurement system, just confirming that the request has been received. After that, the processing continued. Of course, the first step was to pass that XML and then call various other sub-processes in parallel. We already covered that there were some data quality checks that we did, and then we called the MDM search query to figure out if there's any duplicate supplier exist in the system. And then a bunch of other data quality validations were done. Again, this portion basically shows the interaction with the hosted MDM. And then once it was done, it was further calling the regional processes. So this is how the input message came in. We had defined some header information, and then the whole payload will be part of the C data type. And this is where we'll get the actual supplier data. This is just an example of one of the sub-process within the primary process. This was one of the data quality sub-process. The important thing here to note is the retry. One thing we have to make sure is that because there are multiple networks involved, it's going to hosted MDM and to regional systems, there's a possibility that sometimes there could be network hiccups and it might fail. So you want to make it resilient. We had configured some retry count. So let's say if it will wait for 5 seconds, try to call that process again, and after X number of time, if it doesn't succeed, then it will fail. And if it fails, then I think we mentioned it will basically go to Alemba and create an incident ticket. Similar concept was applied for calling MDM. In this case, it was basically a SIF call for doing a duplicate check. Now, this is the example of how you would configure the secure agent, or rather tag the secure agent for a particular sub-process. We had discussed before that CI will allow you a nice centralized interface to do a design time configuration. But at the runtime, you can select what secure agent you want to run your process on. So for example, if you want to run some process within a different geography, you can always push that process to execute on the secure agent hosted by that region. So this is the initial data load picture. As we mentioned, we had multiple get systems and some of the custom sources. We leveraged CDI for doing most of the batch loads. The data was first brought into the raw layer, and then we applied some filters like active, inactive suppliers, some history requirements were there. And then eventually it was fed to both Supplier 360 on the MDM side, as well as the new procurement system that they're trying to build. Here's the match rules that we had implemented for the initial data load. Certainly there was some tuning needed post initial run. We executed about 3 to 4 cycles. Data stewards reviewed the results, and this was the end picture that we got. All right, so that was all about the implementation. Before we close out, I would like to review some of the challenges that we had faced during the project. The first one was the coordination that was needed across all the teams. As you can imagine, there were multiple time zones involved, multiple project teams were working together. So, getting everyone's schedule was a little bit difficult. We had to be really proactive in setting up the meetings and going with a very well-defined agenda to ensure that this meetings finish on time and we can optimize the time from everyone. The good part was that this was a critical project, and so we had a backup from our executives, and it was made very clear to all the teams that this project is a priority, and they were requested to reshuffle their other priorities. So at least we got engagement that we needed from all the teams. The other challenge was around coming to an agreement on the core data model. We started with the out-of-box 360 data model, and we really had to explain to all the teams that we are not trying to replicate a full ERP system. Rather, this will be limited to core attributes that are really common for the whole organization. Well, and not all the teams were familiar with the MDM concepts, so it took us some time in conveying our best practices. In fact, we started doing some sessions offline just to educate all the teams around, how MDM works, what are the best practices, and that actually helped us to get appropriate feedback along the way. Similarly, on the data governance side, every region had a different process, so it was slightly hard to get to an agreement on what would be an ultimate enterprise level workflow and who's going to approve at what point. So it took some time, but the data governance committee was good. They continued working on it, and at least they were able to make some decisions. While implementing, we did encounter some minor issues around data. We had to make sure that appropriate code base was set up across the stack, not only to MDM but all the ETL tools, because there were some international characters. Some of the files really had bad data. We had to take care of that as well. But yeah, it was something we were able to manage. One last thing I can mention is that the procurement system that we were dealing with had certain limitations in connecting with the APIs. So we had to do some workarounds. So again, if you're picking up a new project and if you're not planning to use Supplier 360 portal, then make sure that whatever system you're dealing with, you evaluate their API integration capabilities as well. Ultimately, there were multiple network security reviews to ensure that data is not leaving firewall and it is staying where it is supposed to be. We got all the security clearance that was needed to implement the project. All right. So before we get into question and answer sessions, here are the ways we can help further. If you're interested in more follow-up sessions, feel free to provide your feedback and we'll be happy to arrange them. If you're already on the journey of implementing Informatica products, IPS can certainly help you in various ways. We've been helping our customers in conducting technical and business workshops, assessments, advisory services, as well as any implementation support that they need. I've listed some of our executives who will be happy to engage and talk to you further. I also put up my contact just in case if you have any other questions, even after the webinar. Feel free to reach and I'll be happy to assist.
Everyone, please post your queries in the Q&A box. We'll try and answer them.
Thanks, Vrinda. So let me just introduce while questions are popping up. I have my panelist team as well here, Adam, Angel, and Ruben. Adam and Angel would take care of any questions related to MDM. Ruben is going to help on anything around CAI or in general anything around cloud, and I'll also oversee some of those questions. So folks, feel free to start putting your questions. Meanwhile, we'll go over some of the questions that popped up while webinar was going on. Let me see. So the first question we got here is around CAI. Does CAI have capability to encrypt data when writing to a Kafka topic? Ruben, do you want to take that up?
Yeah, so hi everyone. So the CAI, the connector has capabilities to encrypt while talking to Kafka. So we can do either Kerberos, SSL. So it depends on what configuration you have. But yeah, the CAI Kafka connector has those capabilities.
Perfect. Thanks for that. The other question is regarding Kafka Serializer. If you could just send me a little bit more details on that, then we can revert back on this after the session. This is something we'll probably have to look further into. But certainly our platform in general does support serialization with Eversource. So that should not be an issue. But again, we'll have to reconfirm. So I'm going to reply to this, but just give me a little bit of more use case, and then I can get back on this after the session. Yeah. The third question is, is again regarding support of OAuth using REST API. Ruben, again, I think if you can take that up.
Yeah, so most of our connectors support OAuth, calling APIs, and then we have the capabilities of creating our own like service connectors in CAI. So you can have any support of for any API connectivity. We can support OAuth or any kind of authentication.
Perfect. Thanks for that. Then I think there's another question, but I think that's slightly different. It's probably related to Power Exchange, so we can take that as well offline. So let me move on to the next one. There's another question. Looks like a lot of interest on CI. Does CI can CI be integrated with custom MDM solution outside of Informatica product suite? Yes, as we said, right? CI is a generic tool. Certainly, of course, we use a lot more in the context of Informatica products. But as I was showing that slide, it can support any REST service, any SOAP web service, or any other interface. So overall, with again, if it's a Bastion source, then we can certainly plug in the CDI as well. But generally speaking, pretty much it can connect to anything either with Informatica or outside of Informatica. Yeah. Then can you talk about event-driven architecture to Salesforce platform and then write to Kafka topic? Slightly a little bit more specific question, but in general, look, our platform, in fact, when we built this first, maybe even 10 years before, Salesforce was very first application that we started looking into. So I would say there's a very robust support for anything and everything that you have to do on Salesforce. And, of course, Kafka, as Ruben mentioned, we have the Kafka connector. So this is doable. I'll review internally and see, if we can have something more specific for this use case. But in general, from a feasibility perspective, this should not be an issue. Yeah. Looking at other questions. All right. Ruben, I'm not sure if you can take this up, but it says, can OAuth be available for on-premise using HTTP transformation? That's something, do we know, or should we follow up and answer after the session?
Yeah, I'm not sure what on-premise. So is it like a Power Center HTTP transformation? No, not sure. Yeah. So
yeah, I think
we might need to more details
Power
on
Center?
this one.
Yeah, so I'll follow up on this, and we can take this offline. All right. While other questions comes up, feel free, guys, to post the questions. But maybe Angel, while you are around, do you want to share your experience or any questions that you have faced, while presenting this topic internally or externally to other folks? And I kind of remember that there were some questions around GDPR, CCPA. So maybe you can cover that, Angel.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, as we know, all data security and customer consent has become more and more important in the last few years with different laws in different regions. So as such, all this consent data has become part of what we consider master data. Given that, Informatica has a consent data accelerator, which can be integrated with our 360 solutions. So once we master those consents, we can link that to the customer profile, customer or supplier profile, to better understand how you should use the data, where the consent was given, where the consent was revoked, and what types of data can be used for different purposes. This information, we can define all the necessary processes to apply all the correct data filters and the integration layers. And also, we can use other Informatica tools like Axon and data privacy to manage those policies and monitor the data usage across the systems and across the different integration layers. So it's something very important to be considered implementing a global solution. obviously you're supposed to define fines if data is not used in the proper way, and how data is shared across geographic regions. So something to be kept in mind.
Thanks, Angel. This another question. It looks around CAH. I don't think we have covered a lot here, but the question is, which is the best approach to publish data into CI's repository, whether it's through DI or AI? I'm assuming you're asking whether it's through CDI or CAI. Angel, you can probably give your feedback, but again, I don't think there's a best approach. It's more about what you need. Of course, if it's a batch-driven data, then you will use CDI. If it's something that you're getting event-driven, then I think you'll use CAI. Angel, do you have any different thing to add here?
I think that's what you said. It's a good rule of thumb. CAI is more for event-based process-driven design and integrating with all multiple synchronous or asynchronous interfaces, and CDI obviously for anything with large volumes or batch schedulers. And I think one of the best alternatives for a solution like this is to leverage our data integration hub, which is also part of our IICS platform, so Cloud Data Integration Hub. It provides the option for a centralized publication repository where data from MDM can be published on any frequency defined, and where you can have as many data subscribers pulling data from, each on their own schedules. Right, so each of those publish and subscribe processes can have different runtime secure agents assigned as well. That way you can bridge those network and connectivity gaps between regions and systems across the globe. And if it's something more event-driven, then CAI, right? You can have your process endpoint and receive any payloads, or have a listener, a Kafka listener, or a JMS listener in the case of MDM, and then have a process pushing downstream to other sub processes, right? Or to a final system. So I think the best approach is look at it case by case per system, and then make a decision for CDI versus CAI. Both are equally important integration patterns.
Perfect. We have one more, and this is basically, can CI have the capability to invoke a custom jar libraries related to encryption for Confluent Kafka Enterprise Edition? I would say this is a little bit more specific question, especially if it's related to customization. But yeah, in general, CI does have support for Java programs. But this is something we probably, I don't think we can confidently say yes or no right now without knowing the full scenario. But yes, in general, we do have that capability to call a Java program. Ruben, do you want to add anything
and
here?
Also, yeah, so as you said, we cannot say yes or no, but we also have the process developer tool that, in conjunction with CEI, can handle most of the Java applications that we have encountered so far. So yeah.
Yeah, correct. In general, again, look, the CI, as Ruben mentioned, right, can support a wide variety of interfaces, and in fact, one of the major thing was Java development. So I don't see an issue, but again, we'll probably have to review this use case before we can arrive to a conclusion. All right. So I think with that, at least I have covered every question that's there on the chat. So while we await for other questions, Adam, do you want to add anything based on your experience on this area? Any questions that you have been asked in past around this?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I'll just comment on a few things, just from doing MDM for a number of years. One, I really like that slide where you had the chart, the checks for how to think about and consider different patterns for hub distribution. Just I think some of the things I'll just kind of echo, obviously, we'd like to have that, try to keep it as simple as possible when you're starting up, right? And then, it will evolve as your roadmap and how it gets used around the enterprise, right? It will evolve MDM, but, start out if you can simple. A lot of times we see, a lot of, separating ORSs into different domains. Really, if you can have that singular ORS, right, to get that 360-degree view of data, build the relationships, right, so you can really see the breadth of how customers and organizations are really interacting with your data, your enterprise. It's important stuff to keep in mind. And then this is a great presentation because IICS is becoming more and more prominent with our integrations, and in particular CAI, right? Because it is a great tool for us to use, right? It's going to allow us to, build out that orchestration that years ago would have been more customized, building out Java applications. So this is very, very helpful stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamin, Angel, and Ruben. Thanks for the session, Jamin, especially. Looks like we have answered most of the questions and almost on top of the hour. If we have failed to answer any of your questions, we'll get back to you after this session. As you all know, all Tech Tuesdays webinars are being recorded and will be available in the Informatica Support YouTube channel and the Success Portal as well in the Tech Tuesdays page. There you'll be able to download it in the form of PDF as well. Also, after this session, there is a survey. Please let us know your thoughts about the session and future topics that you'd like to have as Tech Tuesdays sessions. Thank you for joining in. Thanks, everyone. See you on our next Tech Tuesdays webinars. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.